Sada Abe. When a police inspector walked into Tokyo Inn room on the afternoon of 20th May 1936 to check out the identity of the occupant, he didn't expect to find 31-year-old Sada Abe. And even after she'd announced who she was, he refused to believe her. Then, though, she took out of her bodice a paper parcel and unfolded it, and the evidence was unmistakable, for it contained the severed genitals of her dead lover, Kichiso Ichida. The naked body of restaurant owner Ishida had been found by a chambermaid 2 days before in a room in the equivalent of a modern love hotel. Carved onto his thigh and written in blood on a bed sheet were the characters Sada Kichi Futari Kiri, Sada and Kichi inseparable forever. The word Sada had been written on his left arm. His private parts had been cut off. Sada was a waitress at Ishida's restaurant, and the police soon put out a warrant for her and circulated her photograph to the press, which ran the details of the crime as front page news. When she was finally arrested, having written 2 letters of farewell, as well as a long emotional message to her dead lover, as it turned out, the newspapers printed special editions. Sada was suddenly the hottest story in the entire country. Sada Abe was the last child of a prosperous map maker in Kanda, but she was an incorrigible and promiscuous teenager, and at 18, her father sold her to a brothel in Yokohama as a geisha. She worked in the sex business, one way and another, through her 20s, and ended up in Tokyo as the kept woman of a rich middle aged man. It was then, perhaps out of boredom, perhaps out of a need to earn extra cash, that she took a job as a waitress in Ishida's restaurant. Ishida was married with children, but he was also an inveterate womanizer, and it wasn't long before the two of them were secretly meeting for increasingly frenzied sex sessions anywhere they could. Sada was insatiable. Doctors later suggested she must have had a medical condition, but in Ishida, she'd met her match. They began to push at the boundaries, obsessively searching out new ways to pleasure each other. She would throttle him with a sash cord to just this side of insensibility, resulting in staggering, heart-stopping orgasms in both of them. Finally, they went too far. It's possible that a sedative Sada had bought for Ishida, who'd been complaining of insomnia, had weakened his resistance. But Sada, in interviews with the police, claimed that she'd meant to kill him. She said, "I have loved him so much. I wanted him all to myself. I knew that if I killed him, no other woman could ever touch him again. So I killed him." About the cutting off his genitals, she added, They belonged to someone I loved. Everything of Ishida's had become mine. Sada, who by then had spawned a new Japanese word, Sadaism, was sentenced to 6 years imprisonment but was released under an amnesty in 1941. She moved away from Tokyo under an assumed name and got married. Then, in 1947, she was rediscovered by a journalist, and the whole story was retold in in garish detail in a bestseller, The Sex Confessions of Sada. In a subsequent magazine interview with a well known author, Sada said that she had only ever loved one man, Kichiso Ishida. The author later described what she'd done as total love. For her to cut off his member as a keepsake was the ultimate feminine act. The last time Ishida's genitals were seen was at a post war department store exhibition sponsored by, among others, the Department of Health and Welfare. Since then, a full scale biography of Sada has appeared, as well as several films about her and Ishida's liaison. Among them, the erotic masterpiece of Nagisa Oshima, In the Realm of the Senses. Hi, Joseph Persiva. I like your video. Thank you. Thank you, Ramenum. Thank you, Cherry Berry. That was 100 Most Infamous Criminals. And now we are going to have some philosophy for those philosophers out there who wonder how the world is working. Well, today we're going to read about Maurice Merleau-Ponty. In order to see the world, we must break with our familiar acceptance of it. Okay? Excellent, my friends. So here, let's read a bit of the context of this famous philosopher. Epistemology, approach phenomenology. Before 4th century BCE, Aristotle claims that philosophy begins with a sense of wonder. 1641, René Descartes, Meditations of First Philosophy, establishes a form of mind, body, dualism that Merleau-Ponty will reject. We will see that later. Early 1900s, Edmund Husserl founds phenomenology as a philosophical school. 1927, Martin Heidegger writes Being and Time, a major influence on Merleau-Ponty. And after 1979, Herbert Dreyfus draws on the works of Heidegger, Wittgenstein, and Merleau-Ponty to explore philosophical problems raised by artificial intelligence and robotics. So now let's start reading about our friend Maurice Merleau-Ponty, who was born in 1908 and died 1961. So let's take a read at this. The idea that philosophy begins with our ability to wonder at the world goes back as far as ancient Greece. Usually we take our everyday lives for granted. But Aristotle claimed that if we want to understand the world more deeply, we have to put aside our familiar acceptance of things. And nowhere, perhaps, is this harder to do than in the realm of our experience. After all, what could be more reliable than the facts of direct perception? French philosopher Merleau-Ponty was interested in looking more closely at our experience of the world and in questioning our everyday assumptions. This puts him in the tradition known as phenomenology, an approach to philosophy pioneered by Edmund. Let's take a closer look at this diagram, okay? What do we have here? It says, our experience is filled with puzzles and contradictions. And an arrow here pointing at this direction. Our everyday assumptions prevent us from seeing these puzzles and contradictions. We have to do two things. Relearn to look at our experience or put our everyday assumptions to one side. And then they took conversion to, in order to see the world, we must break with our familiar acceptance of it. Excellent. So I was saying, French philosopher Merleau-Ponty was interested in looking more closely at our experience of the world and in questioning our everyday assumptions. This puts him in the tradition known as phenomenology, an approach to philosophy pioneered by Edmund Husserl at the beginning of the 20th century. Husserl wanted to explore first person experience in a systematic way while putting all assumptions about it to one side. Here we have a quote by Maurice Merleau-Ponty. It says, "Man is in the world, and only in the world does he know himself." What do we have here? The body subject. Merleau-Ponty takes up Husserl's approach, but with one important difference. He's concerned that Husserl ignores what is most important about our experience, the fact that it consists not just of mental experience, but also of bodily experience. In his most important book, The Phenomenology of Perception, Merleau-Ponty explores this idea and comes to the conclusion that the mind and body are not separate entities, and a thought that contradicts a long philosophical tradition championed by Descartes. For Merleau-Ponty, we have to see that thought and perception are embodied, and that the world, consciousness, and the body are all part of a single system. And his alternative to the disembodied mind proposed by Descartes is what he calls the body subject. In other words, Merleau-Ponty rejects the dualist's view that the world is made of two separate entities called mind and matter. Cognitive science. Because he was interested in seeing the world anew, Merleau-Ponty took an interest in cases of abnormal experience. For example, he believed that the phantom limb phenomenon, in which an amputee feels a missing limb, shows that the body cannot simply be a machine. If it were, the body would no longer acknowledge the missing part. But it still exists for the subject because the limb has always been bound up with the subject's will. In other words, the body is never just a body, it is always a lived body. Merleau-Ponty Merleau-Ponty's focus on the role of the body in experience and his insights into the nature of the mind as fundamentally embodied have led to a revival of interest in his work among cognitive scientists. Many recent developments in cognitive science seem to bear out his idea that once we break with our familiar acceptance of the world, experience is very strange indeed. Here we have a scan of our brain. It says MRI scans of the brain provide doctors with life-saving information. However, in Merleau-Ponty's view, no amount of physical information can give us a complete account of experience. Here, a biography of Merleau-Ponty. Come on, join me. Maurice Merleau-Ponty. Maurice Merleau-Ponty was born in Rochefort-sur-Mer, France in 1908. He attended the École Normale Supérieure along with Jean-Paul Sartre and Simone de Beauvoir and graduated in philosophy in 1930. He worked as a teacher at various schools until joining the infantry during World War II. His major work, The Phenomenology of Perception, was published in 1945, after which he taught philosophy at the University of Lyon. Merleau-Ponty's interests extend beyond philosophy to include subjects such as education and child psychology. He was also a regular contributor to the journal Le Temps Moderne. In 1952, Merleau-Ponty became the youngest ever chair of philosophy at the Collège de France and remained in the post until his death in 1961 at the age of only 53. Key works: 1942, The Structure of Behavior; 1945, The Phenomenology of Perception; 1964, The Visible and the Invisible. Well, that was it, guys. Thank you so much for being back there, joining me in this new experience about philosophy with our excellent book, The Philosophy Book. Thank you so much, guys. That was it. Good night.